To the listener, I'd like to say welcome to Gordon Hogg, MLA, in White Rock, Surrey. I'm Johan Sandstrom, Sandstrom Group, Sandstrom Media, whatever, and I'm a freelancing operator in White Rock since quite a number of years. For you people that haven't heard me before, I like to, and I feel very flattered of being able to be here and meet with Gordon with regards to a particular event, an expedition I call it. But it's great to have you here, and please tell us a little about it. You had a great, you were invited. You were select of 20 select individuals, and I think it's great. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Johan. A pleasure to be here, and thank you for your interest in this community and the many interviews you've done with so many people across our community, and continuing to help bring our community together and the issues that become community. As you said, I was selected as one of 20 people from across Canada by an organization called Sport Matters and the McConnell Foundation to participate in a 4-day retreat in a place called Wasson Island in the Muskokas, about 2 hours north of Toronto. And we were there for the 20 of us to look at the impact that sport can have for social change.
I have to ask you, how was the accommodation? Was it how is it? How is it there? I thought it was Eastern Canada, but you say they consider themselves mid.
Central Canada. Ontario thinks they're pretty much Central Canada.
Okay,
so
that's Central
the accommodations
Canada.
were fine. It was the island we were on only had this. We were the only ones on it. In fact,
right.
Some of the people got up in the morning and swam around the island. It took about 20 minutes for them to swim around. So it was
Did you do that?
I did not do that.
No, but you're not much of a swimmer, but you are ball.
Played a lot of baseball, basketball, football,
yeah,
soccer. So those were sports I participated in.
One time when we had the time, I'd like to ask you, why is it called American football? Why is it called football when it's more like rugby? And in Europe they say, or here we call it soccer, which is a real weird thing. In Germany they say Fußball.
Yeah.
So that's a big thing to talk about.
We can explore that one day. Talk about that.
When you were kind enough to invite me about this opportunity to talk to you on the subject, we talked about sports. We talked about, and that was my interpretation. We are talking about how sports unite people, how people build teams around and within sports. And pardon me now if I sound like a layman. I am. I'm not much for sports. I like golf. There's a lot of stuff you like, and I just had a great time last Sunday using my new 32-inch flat screen TV, looking at tennis, more tennis, and golf. And said, "What are you doing?" Then, "Well, I've been in the TV the whole day." And the sun was beautiful in White Rock. So let's go on and talk about sports, if you don't mind. But I give you totally free.
Well, let me then go back sort of 2,500 years ago. Plato said you can learn way more about a person in an hour of play than you can in a year of conversation. And I think that goes back to some of the heritage of some of the first recordings that we have.
That was Plato, yeah.
That was Plato that came out with that statement, and certainly you can go back further than that and find the beginnings of sport happening. And I think that virtually all cultures teach their values, their mores, their beliefs through the process of play. So if you just leave children together, they start to play. They start to interact, and they learn about each other through that process of play. And then ultimately those processes of play become sport.
You have lots of experience, Gordon, about this, because you have been so involved. You have been the founder of many entities that is still working today, and working, I understand, very well in our community.
Yes,
and maybe nationwide as well, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm blessed to have had the opportunity to participate in sports all my life. I got into politics as a result of sport, as a result of coaching Little League and being involved in the community in that so many ways. So I've been very fortunate. I've, like so many people, watched the Olympics and watched professional sports, and with modern media, seeing the great power that professional athletes have in terms of when they speak about something, people tend to listen, not because they're knowledgeable, but because they're athletes. when you look at the role that the Olympics has, I believe the role of the Olympics is actually bringing our world closer together.
Everyone says, sorry for interrupting, but everyone says that the Olympics is an awful lot of money being spent, and people have a hard time to assimilate that to a real goal, or of course national pride and everything else. But what do you say about that? People that complain, oh, it costs a lot of money, and equipment costs money today. You play hockey, I think it costs about $3,000-4,000 to equip your son or daughter into
not quite that much,
hockey.
but it's expensive, and sort of that's why we have programs like Kids Sport, which provides, which I've been an active member in, and we run the Surrey White Rock chapter out of our office here, where people who can't afford the cost of registration for some sports, that we raise funds to be able to provide for that. But when you look at FIFA, look at the World Cup of soccer, there were the same complaints about the amount of money that's spent. The FIFA as an organization is a very wealthy organization that spent millions and billions of dollars on centralized. They've got a lot of money in the bank. So there's a lot of money connected with sport, and I hear people complaining that the value of sport gets tainted because of the finance. You see people who are professional athletes who are in the last year of their contract, and they seem to perform well, and then they lose that. There's a wonderful little story that about intrinsic reward is that value, that motivation we get out of the joy of sport, or the joy of doing something, whether it's sport or arts or culture. The joy that we get out of that is intrinsically rewarding. Sometimes as soon as you start to pay that, extrinsically rewarding it, some of that is diminished. And there's a wonderful little story. I used to do some sports psychology with hockey and basketball and baseball teams.
Right.
And one of the stories I used to tell is about 3 kids who are about 7 years old who are walking home from school with their soccer ball, their football.
Yeah.
And they stop and they're kicking it against the wall of an old building. And it's an old apartment block, and there's an elderly gentleman who lives in the basement and keeps hearing this thump, thump every day after school. So finally he goes out to them and says, you know, I'm getting pretty elderly, don't have much joy in my life. I really look forward to when you come and kick the soccer ball against my wall. It's something I look forward to each day. He said, in fact, if you'll keep doing this, I'll give you each 25 cents a day for doing it. And the kids say, well, if we're doing it anyway, this is great, we're going to get money too. So he gives them each 25 cents. A couple days later, they come in and kick again. He says, don't have 25 cents. Here's all I can afford to give you is 10 cents. Okay. About a week later, he says, I'm sorry, I don't have any money. Well, they say, well, to heck with you, we won't do it then. And that's sort of a little metaphor for what often happens with professional athletes. How do they get their sense? So we have to be ever so careful. So when you talk about the professionalization of sport, and the Olympics now involves a number of professionals that get paid in it. People are treated equitably. But for years, professional athletes were not allowed to participate in the Olympics for that very reason does that somehow take away the purity of sport. In many ways, I think perhaps our society is looking at things differently. Maybe there is some contamination of the purity of sport that was there when the Olympics first started back in Olympia.
Wouldn't you say that corruption comes out of that as well, greed, and there are other powers and psychological entities that takes place here all of a sudden because it becomes so popular. So some sports, tennis or golf or hockey, to mention hockey, why not? I mean, I think it's horrendous. The best part is when you talk about some hockey players, they get millions, but they also do an awful lot of good stuff in their own country. I'm talking about the Twins.
Yeah.
In
the Swedish Twins.
Yeah, the Swedish Twins here, and they are forever thankful in Sweden, the youth, because they really have a source that they can depend on. Because these guys are getting millions, and they place that and support that, which is nice.
Absolutely, and there are lots of large corporations that do the same thing. There are lots of business people that do the same thing. So there are lots of ways of contributing through sport, and sport can have an impact. But there are lots of studies that show that some of the skills that you learn in sport, which is teamwork and getting along with each other, frustration, dealing with anxiety, dealing with anger management, disappointment. All of those things are things that you realize and can benefit in the field of in other fields, in the fields of life. The studies that have been done with some of the top poker players that's become so popular lately, the Texas Hold'em tournaments, the very best ones of those tend to be athletes, tend to be people who've been through the angst and the pressure of different circumstances and situations. So there are lots of ways that sport contribute to society. There are ways that, like everything in our society, can become very negative and can be taken away. So how do we hold on to the goodness of sport, the value of sport, the value in terms of doing things? And I think people are starting to recognize that it's much broader than originally thought. I started a program called Night Hoops, which was, I found that youth that were committing offenses, about 90% of them were committing their offenses late at night. Usually on weekends when there wasn't much else to do. So we started a program where they played basketball late at night. And the Vancouver Grizzlies gave us seasons tickets and to allow kids to go to their basketball games, and they really got wound up in basketball. We saw a reduction of those kids that participated in night hoops in some of the negative activities that have been involved.
So it is very much a layer of occupancy or occupation that they need. They need to be activated.
Well, I think it's probably more than activation. And let me just use another parallel. The number of organizations, there's been a recent study done on new immigrants to Canada. And
right.
So our traditional ways of settlement, of coming into Canada and understanding what it is to be a Canadian, has been you'll sit down and you'll give people an orientation on what it is to be a Canadian and go through that. You'll get your exam when you want to take your Canadian citizenship and answering these questions about Canada. They've been running some sports programs. In fact, Immigration Canada ran a soccer tournament in Toronto. And the soccer tournament was every weekend, and they had new Canadians, if they were from Sweden, matched with naturalized Canadians from Sweden, and they'd play an hour of soccer, then they'd have a barbecue, and they'd have other things. They found that was far more effective in people feeling part of the country and understanding the values and mores and beliefs through the processes of sport. People saw that as a way more effective way of doing it. So a recent study that's just been looked at and talked to over 4,000 new Canadians and talked to them in focus groups and asked them about the role of sport. And many of them were saying that I learned more about sport, more about being a Canadian through watching sport, but more importantly, sitting and participating in sport, having a chance to do it. Some of them had some negative experience. There was a woman who reported, my son watched hockey on TV and he still wanted to play hockey, so there was a hockey school, so I took him to hockey school. I didn't know I was supposed to have skates and all of these other things that are associated with it. So how do we better do that? So I think there's a role not just for organizations to be more sensitized to the role that can have in terms of teaching people about Canadian culture, but there's also a responsibility on us individually. If you're sitting watching a soccer game or a football game and you're seeing a new Canadian, we should be talking to them about the role of sport. Because it's much easier to understand things, as Churchill said. Churchill said that there have been many more leaders have been forged on the fields of Eton than all of the classrooms. So how do you do in the fields of play? There's a responsibility for us as Canadians to talk to people.
Now, I need to interrupt you a little there because you're quite fast for my limited resources of absorbing what you're saying, because it's so important what you just said. What I think is important to realize too, that not everyone, and I'm talking about the Thai people or Asian people, they don't assimilate, they don't get into the fabric that easy. The Chinese is a typical example. They are specialists in creating their own community within our Canadian community. I mean, there is no question that we do have really, whereas when I did the radio here, 670 talk shows, Scandinavian Touch, how many Scandinavians were really, if the Canucks were playing, I hardly had any listeners.
Yeah.
And all that stuff. So I think that it's hard to do a comparison, but I think that Chinese is a typical group, and they really they are content by being their own. They are almost like Norwegians. They are self-milked up.
So social capital.
Yeah.
Social capital is the relationship we have with each other, and the relationships can affect change. So social capital is different from physical capital, which may be seen as possessions, but social capital is that we have with each other. So social capital, there's two types of social capital. One is called bonding social capital. And bonding is that you're referring to, the different cultures have, where they connect with each other, with each other around. And bridging social capital is the connections we have across those. So across cultures,
and that's very important.
And sport can help bridge those. Yeah. So even different cultures that come here who may not know anything about hockey, when they were interviewed, they said, well, I would watch some hockey on TV, and that helped me to understand more about the country. And I started to become proud of the performance. So that's a way that this bridging capital can go across different cultures and use sport to do that.
You are talking to me, and I can't help it, because I have a background in the United States, quite a number of years, totally in Canada, and I always wonder, why is it called one football, American football? Because it's not a ball. And then I always wondered, what are the rules? And I have been around Americans and served in the armed forces, and I never did get hey, coming to the ball game? I said, no, I don't understand that. I don't get it. I'm too stupid. I don't see the point in running into one, boom. And if you really look today, the medical sector and medicine and so on, there's a lot of damage done to brains based on American football. And I say that because it's true. That could be true in any other sport too.
Hockey,
maybe.
There's lots of concussions.
Yeah, concussion. They're not good. There's too much rocking the boat, so to speak, and it gives all kinds of sad things happening. But besides that, this conference of 4 days gave you quite a bit to, shall we put, you're going to share that with people here now in the province, in your area.
Yeah, so as an example of it, the people that were there was the executive directors of a number of organizations that are involved in sport. There were executive directors of people who are head up foundations, who are funders for a broad range of social services. They were all looking at, we can deal with sport as a way of connecting people. Just as arts and culture, there are a lot of ways, but it's news, weather, and sport that we see in the 6 o'clock news. It's not news, weather, and culture. So there's a moral responsibility, I believe, for sport to also engage those other ways of becoming good citizens, of understanding and connecting. We need, we're a pluralistic society, a multicultural.
It is the glue.
It is the method to bring people together, to allow people to be human, to allow them to express their humanity, to express their caring for each other, to express and understand. Part of understanding the culture of Canada and becoming Canadian is doing.
Gordon, you haven't said love yet, because that's the word that comes around in many discussions. The love for each other. It doesn't need to be physical love, because it is between genders, and you name it, and so on. But how do you see? You have been how many years in politics now?
36 years in elected positions, locally and provincially.
In your heart, what do you find has given you the most?
What has given me?
As an individual, what has it really delivered to you? This, you are in. I used to say, oh, he's a great guy because he does the waiters race once a year, and then he does a lot of other stuff, and he raises funds for our community, for instance, and all those things, right?
So I guess that's an interesting question. I think the response to it, in fact, one of these people that I was with at Wasson Island said to me, so you've been in politics? And I was the only elected representative out of the 20 people that were invited to this. So he said, so what is it about politics again? What do you think you've accomplished? What is it? And for me, it goes back to those little personal things that happen along the way. So there's an example of a teacher who was a retired teacher. On her pension, she had a particular disease that required a drug that wasn't covered. And the drug was, I think it was something like $800 a month, which she couldn't afford. I was able to talk to some of the people in one of the drug companies, and they provided it for her. That was those personal connections. And I've got a lot of examples of.
That was a good deed that you could deliver.
That was because sometimes dealing with public policy broadly, as we do in Victoria, setting up organizations like Community Living BC, which was set up to give more authority to the developmentally disabled and their families to do things. Those are good public policy conceptual things, but they're things that are sort of at an intellectual level. They're at an emotional, visceral level that kind of connects you. And I think one of my concerns about politicians, provincially and federally, is I don't think they get close enough to understand the emotional or visceral impact of something, nor far enough away to see the patterns that allow you to do a good policy. So I think we get stuck somewhere in the middle of that. So if you're dealing with a public policy issue around knee replacements, so we get a report from the Deputy Minister of Health saying, here are some things I think we should be talking to people who are on the wait lists for knee replacements. So you get that emotional understanding, because understanding and developing policies...
Gordon, you said something that's it's a hot topic, waiting lists. The waiting lists are too long, in general. You know, when it takes a whole year to go and get an MRI, which is today considered worldwide a very desirable method of defining what is wrong with the bones, organs, and so on. Why can't that be speeded up? Why do we need to go to the United States and travel down across the border and pay ourselves and get it quick done? They got it and so on. How come we have not got that safety net for so many people? Because there is a lot of people that are getting paid for being where they're sitting, and they're sitting waiting.
Well, firstly, if it's an emergency and somebody needs an MRI and it's life-threatening, they get it immediately. So our response system to emergent issues is very good. And I hear people all the time with whether it's heart, cancer, whatever, and MRI is part of it, or whatever the treatment might be. People get bumped. I just talked to a friend yesterday who's on a wait list for to have a valve in his heart adjusted, right, as well as he's on a wait list for a liver transplant. He was just bumped. He was supposed to go in next Tuesday. He was bumped off that list, and he said, and I was bumped because, and they told him what the person was, and the person was life or death immediately. I think most people understand that. They would like to have things move more quickly. So with the example of knee and hip replacements, we actually went to UBC and we gave a bunch of extra money, and they set up a clinic to do just that. One of the challenges with doing hip replacements around the province is if you're not, doing them in some of the rural areas where doctors aren't doing them.
But you are a little not colored, but you are initiated. You know a little about this. Your dad was a doctor, medical doctor, and very popular such, with his way of talking to the patients and everything else. So obviously, and all of a sudden we are talking. We started off with sports,
but health is. Sport is applied. When you look at health, that's about health. Isn't just the Ministry of Health and health delivery anymore. Health is about much more broadly. I'm working with the University of Victoria on a World Health Organization. World Health Organization has something called, they call it HIP, H-I-A-P, which means health in all policies. If the role of a society, if the role of government is to, how do we get along with each other? How do we support each other? Then we each have a role in that. So business has a role in terms of the money that they generate to allow that to flow into it. And we all have an important role to it.
It's all about wellness, as you know, and wellness is important, and that's what we are striving towards, to be for everyone, to feel well and healthy and productive.
And not just physically, but emotionally, socially, spiritually,
mentally, everything else. And the spiritual.
And it may well be the most important of those is to have that emotional, spiritual sense of well-being is maybe more important than physical well-being. So there's interesting studies that have been done on people who win multi-million dollars, and people who become a paraplegic, and so people both assume that you'd be different. 6 months later, the level of well-being, social emotional well-being, is exactly the same as those people that won $10 million and those people that become a paraplegic. So it has a lot, all these assumptions we make of, I'd be so happy if I had more money. Not so. I'd be really unhappy if I became a paraplegic. Not so. And the immediate response is very short-lived.
You know, we have spoken quite a bit, and we have spent some, what I consider, I hope for the listener as well, 24 minutes of good time, and very informative. Could you summarize a little of what I started off by asking you? What has it given you? You have a long, over 30 years career as a politician. You are well known and well liked in the community. And my question is, how are you being affected by all the negativism? We had an accident here. It's called, quote unquote, an accident. It's actually the tailings and the things that happen in the mining industry. And you have actually, for a short period of time, been Minister of Mining. So can you finish with that? Because I think it's important. People wonder, who is this man that speaks so eloquently about these very, very human aspects of life in the community? Can you give me a little about what you would like to deliver on that part? Because it is a big discussion locally and in the province with the Premier and with all the Barrett, the sitting Minister of Mining, Mr. Barrett, so on. So would you kindly do us a favor, please?
Well, I will.
3 minutes.
3 minutes. I'll see what I can say. Churchill once said that this is the worst form of government there is, except for all the rest. So a recognition that there are a lot of challenges when any time that we have government, any time that we try and organize. And so the driving principle for me around government is the question of how we take care of each other. How do we take care of all of us around those dimensions we were talking about, physical, emotional, spiritual sense of well-being? How do we
I have to interrupt you almost like Shirley Rose saying, hey, listen, I got to ask you though, consider what's going on in the grapevine, what people are talking about. They talk about the million billion game, with all the money going there and money going there, and when you read it, regardless, the Globe and Mail or Vancouver Sun or White Drunk Sun, with all the various people that have expressing their disgust with certain things that do happen, and tailings, as we know, is just a reservoir connecting.
So you're talking specifically about Mount Poly, as opposed to other
I think it's very important to know, because we do have something that we are very depending on the water, and we have resources in Canada that are definitely outstanding when it comes to water supply. For the rest of the world, I can put, I think we have something like 70%, over 70% of water compared to drinking water, compared to other.
So where I was going before I was coming back to Mount Poly, but I was trying to give some context to that, because there are those of us in this world who see everything through rose-colored glasses and everything positive. There are people who see negativity and everything. So it is how we tend to approach issues that become important. Mm-hmm. So an issue like Mount Poly, which is devastating, it's a terrible, terrible travesty, what happened with Mount Poly, and we have to do everything we can to ensure that doesn't happen. There's something like 3,500 tailings ponds around the world, exactly. And about one a year breaks somewhere. This is probably the most dramatic one that I'm aware of in Canada.
I happen to know one personally down the Sacramento River. That was years, 1984, 86. Where the fish quit swimming, the ecological balance was upset by what? Toxins, heavy metals. Because these little critters, if they are crayfish or other fish, hey, they don't like that. They dig and they go for cover.
And humans don't like it either.
No.
And so we have to do everything that we can to ensure that never happens again. We have to do everything we can to cure that. We go through life learning. We learn a lot more. We know we're a lot better in many ways now than we were, 200 years ago, where we believed if you had an illness, we'd give you a leech and they'd suck some blood out of you and somehow you'd be better. So we're always learning. But we in British Columbia and in Canada have a particularly important heritage around our natural resources. And our natural resources have been the development of this province. But also our human resources are so important within that framework. And we've been very fortunate to attract a lot of people from around the world to this province who've helped us all get better, has helped us better understand, bringing different perspectives so that we can learn to get along, to support each other. So going back to that issue about how do we take care of each other, each of us has a role in that. And part of it
Right.
is taking care of ourselves responsibly so that we're not as dependent as we might otherwise be on a healthcare system or a social service system. We have to bring the skills. I want to live in a community where people are respected, not for the deficits and weaknesses that all of us have, but for the strengths that all of us have. But some people seem to focus on the negative that each one of us has, and I am one of those, as you are. As
Exactly.
everyone has a weakness, and everybody has weaknesses, but everybody has strengths.
But you know,
How
there
much
are
better
issues.
can you focus on that?
Let me just finish as a broadcaster saying, excuse me, saying one thing that I hear from people when I meet with people, and I meet a lot of people, but we talk about fracking. Is it good? We talk about the risks with mining.
Yeah.
Is it good? Well, what is this all for? For either to develop an export product for delivery to a strange country. We have locally in White Rock, we talk about this transportation of thermal coal from the United States. And there they don't want to hear about it, but here we are fighting, we don't want it on our railroad because it is claimed to do something bad. Now, all that thing is not embraced with the blessing hands of what we were just talking about here, being healthy, getting wealthy in a normal way, and so on. I'm thinking of the sports and its unifying and healing. There is something that needs to be done. And I use the word healing all of a sudden. And we can talk about this quite a lot because you are such a knowledgeable person. And Johan Sandstrom would like to say thank you very much for being on the show. That was great.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to come back when we get the results of the information we put into this. And
there will
talk
be
to you
an
about it.
outcome. There will be an outcome.
You bet.
Oh, that's wonderful. Maybe I can be privy to some sort of a little documentation
Sure.
on that.
Be happy to talk to you about that.
Well, thank you very much. And you have listened to Gordon Hogg, MLA in White Rock, South Surrey, and doing his business out of the legislative office in Victoria, British Columbia. I'm Johan Sandstrom saying thanks for listening and over and out. Thank you.